Technical University of Berlin, but did her PhD at the University of Vienna, and now she will tell you what she does there.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you also for the invitation, and I'm very happy to give a talk to you today. And since I assume that you are mostly cosmologists who are listening, I will give more of an overview talk, because I think, yeah, what I speak about today is quite different from what you usually deal with. So I start with this nice image here of our ancestor. This is the Australopithecus afarensis, who stares at a supernova in the sky. And you can see the bright spot there is not the sun, because the sun has already set and is reflecting on the moon. And unfortunately, our ancestor's brain volume was only half of ours, so we can only imagine what he's thinking. Maybe nothing, or maybe something else. But let us look closer now at this supernova. So supernova are stellar explosions at the end of the lifetime of a massive star, and the star throws its ejecta into space, and depending on its evolutionary state and also on the surrounding medium, the ejecta can be a perfect sphere or show such filamentary structures. For instance, here the bright colors show where dust is forming in the supernova remnant, and we can observe such a remnant through a telescope. But what if the supernova happened millions of years ago? Then the remnant would not be visible anymore today like this, but there still might be a way to detect it, because if the supernova was close enough and the remnant swept over our solar system in the past, then it could have left traces on Earth. Obviously not like this. The supernova should not be too close, otherwise we would not be here to do research on this topic. And this is my outline. After an introduction, I will discuss past supernova traces and talk about our experimental and theoretical methods. And then I will discuss present supernova traces on Earth. And after that, I will show you my conclusions. Let's start with the introduction. Here's our Milky Way and supernova explosions. They occur mainly in spiral arms. And our sun is located about here in the Orion arm. We zoom into this region now, and this simulation here is a simulation of the interstellar medium, which is the gas and dust between the stars. And here in our solar neighborhood, you can see the scales here, which are 1,000 times 1,000 parsec in the galactic plane. So these are probably micro scales compared to the cosmologic scales that you usually deal with. And in this simulation, blue are the cool and dense regions, and red are the hot and thin medium regions. And what has been simulated here are supernova explosions, creating bubbles and superbubbles within the interstellar medium, and the cross is where the sun is located. And we run the simulation now. It starts 15 million years ago and runs 15 million years into the past, into the future. And if you watch the region of our sun, you see that the supernova explosions, they push away the interstellar medium and they leave a cavity inside in which we are then located, and the shell at the boundary is forming, which means that at some time in the past, our solar system got hit by the expanding superbubble shell, as well as by individual supernova that exploded later inside the superbubble. And this structure really exists. It has been observed because the interior emits in the soft X-ray spectrum, and boundaries have been determined from color excess measurements. And we call this our local bubble. And we also have a neighbor bubble, which is the one. Our local bubble formed about 14 million years ago by 14 to 20 supernova explosions. This is where our sun is located, and as you can see from the temperature and density, we live in a quite harsh environment. The local bubble interior has about 1 million Kelvin, but our sun right now is actually located in a less hot and also denser medium, in a cloud which we call the local interstellar cloud, or the local fluff. And the sun entered this region some 10,000 years ago and will leave in some 10,000 years in the future. And here are some stars in our solar environment, and a very nearby stellar association is the Scorpius-Centaurus association, which we can observe from the southern hemisphere and which we will inspect later in this talk. So all of this, to summarize, tells us that our solar system is located inside of a supernova remnant, and that sometime in the past million years, the ejecta must have swept over the solar system and could have left detectable traces on Earth. And such a scenario was actually proposed in 1996 by two publications. They suggested that nearby supernova explosions could potentially leave traces in deep sea sediments on Earth in the form of long-lived radioactive isotopes. And all isotopes mentioned here, they share the similarity that they have half-lives in the order of 0.3 to 80 million years. This is important because when our solar system formed 4.6 billion years ago, it was made from the elements of previous stellar generations, which also contained these radioactive isotopes. But today, the radionuclides, because of their short half-lives compared to the formation of the solar system age, have decayed since then. And if we still detect these radionuclides on Earth and there are no other sources on Earth or within the solar system, that means they must have been freshly synthesized and reached the Earth recently during the past million years. So the authors proposed a variety of long-lived radionuclides, and we will focus mainly on iron-60 and on aluminum-26. Both radionuclides are ejected in massive stars, and iron-60 has a half-life of 2.6 million years and is produced via neutron capture processes on iron. And aluminum-26 has a shorter half-life of 0.7 million years, and the dominant reaction is here the magnesium-25 p-gamma reaction to form aluminum-26. So from nucleosynthesis models, we get the stellar yields, which means how much of the isotope is ejected when the star dies. And here, the iron-60 to aluminum-26 ratios from different model outcomes are plotted. And you see with the initial stellar masses, and you see they scatter quite a bit because of different numerical models and different input parameters into these models. And that these isotopes are really produced and ejected in supernova explosions has been measured by the diffuse distribution of aluminum-26 in our galaxy. So this was measured by the detection of gamma rays, which come from the decay, the radioactive decay of aluminum-26 to magnesium-26. And because of the quite short half-life of aluminum-26, this distribution indicates that we have a continuous production of aluminum-26 through our galaxy from supernova. And also from this distribution, a supernova rate of 2 supernova per century was estimated. Also for iron-60, the decay to nickel-60 has been detected via gamma rays. From these two isotopes, an average interstellar medium was derived, which is 0.18 plus minus something. And if we plot this together with the numerical model data, we see that the interstellar median ratio is lower than the results of most numerical models, which might suggest that the theoretical models either overestimate iron-60 or underestimate aluminum-26 or both. So these observations can serve as a test for the nucleosynthesis models. Okay, after these two radionuclides are produced and ejected from massive stars, they could reach the solar system if the supernova is close enough. And close enough means, in this case, a distance between 10 and 150 parsec. Because 10 parsec is the so-called kill distance, where the biosphere would probably not survive. And supernova in 150 parsec or more would not leave any traces anymore. For iron-60, we can say that other sources are negligible, but for aluminum-26 it's not that simple, because this radionuclide is produced from the interaction of cosmic rays with argon in the Earth's atmosphere. And this means that a supernova signal could be overwhelmed by this continuous background. So we look again at these publications that suggested to search for these isotopes, and the authors also suggested to search in deep sea sediments. And the reason is demonstrated here by my colleague. He searches for supernova traces in some random sediment. And as you can see, this is not ideal, as the soil is mixed due to biologic activity and does not have a good time information. So such a sediment is maybe better for anthropogenic studies, but not for our purpose. And that's why suitable sediments are located at the ocean floor. These can maintain a time information of millions of years into the past, because almost nothing lives there. And the sediments accumulate more or less homogeneously and very, very slowly. So they can also concentrate a supernova signal. For instance, deep sea crusts, they grow some millimeters per million years, and their time resolution is not that good, but they cover a large time range, which is then ideal for the detection of a million-year-old supernova. And deep sea sediments, they accumulate 1,000 times faster, and these are ideal for better resolving supernova events. So after this quite long introduction, because it's an interdisciplinary research topic, we look now at the results for past supernova traces. And I don't want to spoil anymore. Are there any traces? So the first indication was found in the manganese crust from the Pacific Ocean by a research group from Munich in Germany. And this crust was cut into 2 millimeter pieces from top to bottom, and each layer contained then a time information of about 800,000 years. And the iron content in this crust was measured with a method called accelerator mass spectrometry, which is able to detect one iron-60 atom in 10 to the 15 stable iron atoms. And that's the result here, which was published in 2004. On the y-axis, there's the iron-60 to stable iron ratio, which is in the order of 10 to the minus 15. So just above the detection limit, which is the dashed horizontal line. And on the x-axis is the time, which is equivalent to the depths in the crust. And you can see we go back 14 million years into the past, which is about the age of the local bubble. And at around 2 million years, we have a peak in iron-60. And this was the first significant signal. And in order to be sure that the signal is really there and it's global, that would be expected from a supernova, this signal had to be detected again in other ocean sediments and crusts as well. So there was another study in 2008 where deep sea sediments from the Atlantic were analyzed, and these results were actually inconclusive. So the potential signal was so close to the background that it was unclear whether there is a marginal signal or whether there is no signal. So that's why at that time there was skepticism whether these signals are real or not. And then several research groups began working on that topic. And I was involved in this study here, measuring iron 60 in deep sea crusts and nodules and sediments from all major oceans. And my work focused on the deep sea sediments from the Indian Ocean during my PhD time in Vienna. And in order to extract the iron from a sample, there's a lot of chemistry involved, but I will not go in detail here. So once I extracted the iron, we measured it with the accelerator mass spectrometer in Canberra in Australia. And it turned out that in 3-gram sediment sample material, we detected less than 10 iron 60 atoms. But fortunately, we had enough samples, so we got a nice iron 60 signal around 2 million years, which are the black stars in this diagram, which shows the iron 60 flux into the sediment with time. And the other data points are from the crust. They also show this 2 million year old signal. The peak flux was around 30 atoms per year per square centimeter. And if you distribute this over the entire Earth, that amounts to 20 kilograms of iron 60 that was deposited during the time of the peak influx. You can imagine 20 kilograms of flour spread over the Earth's surface, and then you know what accelerator mass spectrometry is capable of detecting. But of course, it cannot measure flour, only very rare isotopes. And the other thing that was surprising was that another iron 60 signal showed up around 8 million years. So apparently there have been 2 events that carried iron 60 onto Earth. So finally, I could tell the skeptic people that we detected iron 60 in deep sea sediments, and the signal is real and it's global. And the skeptic people got quiet, but they were not entirely convinced. Fortunately, there were other studies. For instance, the research group in Munich, they analyzed 2 Pacific deep sea sediments, but not like we did, because they extracted iron from so-called magnetotactic bacteria. And these are microorganisms that live in the sediment and incorporate iron to build magnetite chains in their bodies, which they then use to orient in the sediment via the Earth's magnetic field. And since the sediment and the supernova are 2 million years old, the bacteria are already dead, but the iron is still intact. And the Munich group managed to detect the supernova signal in this iron, which means that this was the first supernova signal detected in a time-resolved biogenic reservoir. And the Munich group also measured iron 60 in lunar samples, which came from the Apollo 12 mission. Lunar samples have the advantage that there is no sedimentation on the moon, so the signal is concentrated basically on the surface. But there are frequent impacts of dust or larger bodies on the surface, and it gets mixed, which is called the gardening effect, and this would dilute a signal. And also cosmic rays interact with nickel in the lunar sediment and produce an iron 60 background. Iron 60 was detected on the moon, as you can see in the other plot, and compared to the background from cosmic ray production in the lower plot, which is shown by the lines. And this means that this iron 60 also comes from nearby supernova. So everything is pointing to supernova events happening close to our solar system in the past. Not only the iron 60 measurements, but also the circumstance that we live in the local bubble. And this finally convinced the Sceptic People. And since I talked about aluminum-26 before, I also have to present you our results on this radionuclide. So the deep sea sediments from the Indian Ocean, we also analyzed for their aluminum-26 content. Remember that aluminum-26 was derived from supernova explosions, but also produced continuously in the Earth's atmosphere. And when we look at the data at the time of the iron-60 peak, then we see that the aluminum data more or less follows an exponential decay that comes from atmospheric input. And the supernova signal is really overwhelmed by this continuous background. So somewhere in this data, also supernova-derived aluminum-26 must be hidden. And that's why we use this data to investigate the limit for the iron-60 to aluminum-26 nucleosynthesis ratio in massive stars, and to compare it to the ISM observations and the nucleosynthesis simulations. Basically, what we did was to transform the previously measured iron-60 signal, which is shown in plot B, to an aluminum-26 signal that is shown in plot C, using an iron-60 to aluminum-26 ratio and compare it to our data, which are the purple stars. So for instance, a low iron-60 to aluminum-26 nucleosynthesis ratio, as shown in the plot, of 0.02 should result in a visible aluminum-26 signature. But we don't find an aluminum-26, so we obtained a lower limit for this ratio from the measurement uncertainty, and then we obtained a ratio of 0.118. If you remember, the ratio derived from the interstellar medium observations. This is very similar to our limit. And our limit can also be compared to stellar nucleosynthesis model results for the stars with different masses. And the light blue area contains the lower limit derived in our study here with the uncertainty. And since it's a lower limit, it also fits the higher nucleosynthesis ratio, which is the darker blue area. So like the gamma ray observations, our measurements can serve as a different kind of test for the numerical models. And most of the model results are confirmed as long as we have only a limit and not a real ratio. This was the experimental part of past supernova traces. Now we come to the theoretical part. Our goal was to find the stars that exploded and formed the local bubble, and at the same time left the iron-60 traces on Earth. So this work already started in 2006 when Fuchs et al. Searched the solar environment for suspicious stellar moving groups that are stars that move together through space as an association. And they explicitly searched for young stars, which were not older than some 10 million years. And what is shown in this video are the young stars they found in a volume with a radius of 200 parsec around the sun. And you can probably spot that there is a clustering of stars. And Fuchs et al., they analyzed those stars and found that most of them belong to two subgroups of the Scorpius-Centaurus association, which are the Upper Centaurus lupus and the Lower Centaurus crux, and they have ages around 20 million years. This is how the stars moved relatively to the sun and also relatively to the boundary of the local bubble today, which is shown as the dashed region. You see that the stars entered this region about 10 to 15 million years ago, and this is when the local bubble started to form. So the stars that we observe today obviously have not exploded yet, but there are no stars more massive than B stars in the moving group. So all of the O stars with shorter lifetimes, they must have already exploded. So together with my colleagues in Berlin, we tried to figure out whether these missing stars were capable of forming the local bubble and leaving a signal on Earth. How do we do that? So in order to model the signal, we need to calculate the fluence, which is the number of iron-60 atoms that reach the Earth per square centimeter. And we modeled only the younger signal at 2 million years ago, because at that time, only this measurement was available. And to derive the fluence and get the input for our local bubble simulation, we need to plug in some constants, among which is the uptake factor, the so-called uptake factor that describes how much iron-60 is actually incorporated into the crust. And we also need to derive the other input values. So, for instance, to obtain the explosion times of the missing stars, we assume that, like in a globular cluster, all stars more or less form at the same time. And when they form, their masses are distributed according to the initial mass function, which is a power law that describes the number of stars over their masses. So in a star cluster, we get a lot of stars with low masses and only a few with large masses. And with this IMF, we derive the number of stars that have exploded as supernova, which are the stars with masses larger than 8 solar masses. And this gives us our 14 to 20 supernova, depending on when the first explosion took place that initiated the formation of the local bubble. And low mass stars, they have longer main sequence lifetimes. That's why they are still there and we can observe them. And the lifetime is also a power law, which states that the stars with the largest masses explode first. So from the IMF, we get the masses, and from the main sequence life, the ages of the missing stars, and with the age of the associations, we also obtain the explosion times of the individual stars. We also need to include the stellar iron-60 yield, so how much is ejected in a supernova. And this depends on the mass of the progenitor star. Those yields are around 10 to the -5 solar masses. And the distances of the exploding stars were derived from kinematic analysis. We traced back the still existing stars in time and space. And we assumed that the missing stars moved also together with those stars. And then we included the observational uncertainties of the position and the velocities of the still existing members. So we got these probability clouds that become larger and more fuzzy with time. And the position with the highest probability in space at a certain time gave us then our explosion distance for this time. And here's one of the outcomes of our numerical model in the galactic plane. The sun is located at the 0 coordinates, and we have 16 supernova explosions, which are expanding into a homogeneous ambient medium and form the local bubble. And at the same time, our neighbor bubble, the loop 1, is forming as well. So in this model, the local bubble shell crosses the solar system 2.2 million years ago, when 15 out of 16 supernova have already exploded. So the local bubble shell delivers the iron-60 content of all 15 previous supernova at once, including radioactive decay. And after that, a single supernova remnant follows at 1.5 million years ago. We also have shock reflection on the outer local bubble shell from single supernova, where the ejecta is reflected back into the local bubble cavity. And now I show you the results for the modeling of the iron-60 distribution. These are the results from the numerical model I just showed you. We display the fluence of iron-60 versus time, and the time actually goes backwards. So first, in this model, the iron-60 from the local bubble shell reaches us, and this signal extends about 100,000 years in time. And then a sharp signal from just one individual supernova remnant reaches us 1.5 million years ago. And this remnant is then reflected at the outer boundary of the local bubble and comes back and brings some more iron-60 to Earth. And here's the fluence translated to the manganese crust. So we also calculated an analytical model and a numerical model with an inhomogeneous ambient medium. And as you can see, the model data fits to the measured data. So we were able to find a model that can reproduce the younger signal at 2 million years ago from the explosions that happened in the Scorpius-Centaurus association. The most prominent member of the Scorpius-Centaurus association that is still existing is the Antares. And the most recent supernova from our model, supernova, are shown here, where the last one at 1.5 million years ago occurred at a distance of 96 parsec. So much further away than the kill distance, fortunately. And if we could observe these supernovae today, then they would have occurred in the stellar constellations of Libra and Lupus. And yeah, with this, I come to the last results part. I promise it's not that long. So just recently, a study came out from scientists at the TU Munich that they detected iron-60 in Antarctic samples, which were not older than 20 years. So they collected 500 kilograms of snow and detected 10 iron-60 atoms that correspond to a flux of 1.2 iron-60 atoms per square centimeter per year. That is still reaching us today. If we compare our ISM simulations, where we showed that iron-60 could arrive today from past supernova that were reflected on the local bubble shell and traveling back inside, then we can say that this could be a good explanation for the iron-60 arriving today, but there are also other possibilities. In the beginning of this talk, I showed you our local fluff, or the local interstellar cloud through which our sun is moving at the moment. It entered some 10,000 years ago, and it's possible that this fluff is somehow enriched in iron-60, and therefore we might receive today more iron-60 than previously when the sun did not move through the local fluff. So we used our deep sea sediments from the Indian Ocean again to figure out whether we can find an increase at in iron-60 at some point in time during the past 10,000 of years to see when we entered the local fluff. So we analyzed 5 surface samples that date back about 30,000 years into the past, and we counted 19 iron-60 atoms. So again, very few atoms. And this translates into the iron-60 deposition rate shown here with time. And in this graph, this so this is shown as an encircled red line, and the black line is the background from other influx sources than supernovae. And this here is the deposition rate from the Antarctic snow, and these are manganese crust measurements that go further back in time towards the signal of iron-60. And if we compare this recent influx in the sediment with our flux during the supernova signal, which is shown here, where we had a flux of 30 atoms per square centimeter per year, then we see that today's influx is 10 times lower, but it's still significant, and also it's steady, which means that there is no jump in the data from an entry of the solar system into the local fluff during these past 30,000 years. So what could be the reason for the influx during the past 30,000 years? We propose the following scenarios. So one is that the 2 million year old signal is still just fading away. And the second is that this is a signal from the iron-60 enriched local fluff, but we just don't see when we entered the local fluff because that was happening more than 30,000 years ago. Or the flux is an echo of previous supernova, which is basically in line with our reflection model. Okay, and now I showed you a lot about supernova traces on Earth. I will come to my conclusions. We detected supernova-derived iron-60 globally on Earth during the past 10 million years, about. And with our theoretical models, we are able to explain the 2 million year old signal. We also have an explanation for the recent influx. And at the moment, we are working on further investigations of this 8 billion year old signal because we were not able to explain that yet. And there are many more studies that are related to our work. I show you a selection of those. For instance, there have been signatures of a 2 million year old supernova have been detected in the spectra of cosmic rays. And even iron-60 itself as a cosmic ray particle has been measured. And because stars are very often in binary systems, there's a research group working on finding the neutron star from the supernova explosion and the corresponding runaway star. And the position where the calculated trajectory of those two components intersect is then the location of the explosion. So they also found one explosion that fits to our theoretical model. And in addition to iron-60 and aluminum-26, there have been measurements of manganese 53 and also of plutonium-244, but plutonium-244 is probably not produced in large amounts in supernova, but rather in neutron star mergers, because we did not detect as much as we expected. And then there's work on the transport of iron-60 and dust grains to Earth and into the ocean, and on the effect of a nearby supernova on the Earth's biosphere. So some articles even claim that the supernova could have had an effect on the human evolution. I guess whatever happened 2 to 3 million years ago is probably debatable. I just say that maybe the Australopithecus afarensis was not that stupid and already calculated the iron-60 fluence when he saw the supernova. And with this, I would like to finish and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny, for this very interesting talk. I learned lots of new things, and I guess most of us did. And so